Welcome to Stories That Matter. I'm your host, Doug Thompson. My special guest today is truly a special guest, Lawton Nuss. And Lawton, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure, Doug.
I know that you're semi-retired and living up in Topeka. And why, my goodness, what a history you have had in the law. You want to give a little information about it? Because you wound up as, well, you name it, rather than me tell.
When I was in the Marine Corps in the mid-70s, I was a legal officer. I was not a lawyer, but it was one of my many duties when we deployed. And I decided to go to law school after that experience, and then I wound up practicing in Salina, Kansas for 20 years doing trial work. And of course, Salina's 40 miles west of Chapman. And then in 2002, I was appointed to the Kansas Supreme Court. And in 2010, I became the Chief Justice. And I was the Chief Justice for about 10 years. And I had 3 years remaining on my term as Chief Justice when I decided I really want to do work with veterans, and I can't add any more to my plate. I'm already working about 70 hours a week as Chief Justice. So I stepped aside from the court, and I've been working on veterans issues ever since.
Tell me about your time in the when you were a pretty young guy and you went straight into the military, because that's why you kind of was always looking back at that. And tell me about that when you first went in. Where'd you go for basic?
Well, I was commissioned as second lieutenant in the Marine Corps in January of 1975. I graduated from University of Kansas, and then I was sent to what's called TBS, which is for all young officers to learn how to be rifle platoon commanders, infantry officers. That was in Quantico, Virginia. It's called the Basic School. And then when I was there, I got my choice of what I wanted to do in the Marine Corps, and I chose to be a combat engineer. And so that in turn sent me to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina for a 6-week course. And from there, I was stationed at Kaneohe Bay, Hawaii with the 1st Marine Brigade. And from there, I deployed twice. And then I got out of the Marine Corps in January of 1979, went back to Salina. My father was ill with cancer, so I stayed with him and my mother. He died in June, and then I started KU Law School in August of 1979.
Did you stay in the reserves?
I was in the inactive reserves. If anything had happened and I got reactivated, I was to report to a unit in Kansas City. But I was never called upon, and then my obligatory time expired, and so I was done.
Okay. And what do you recall about your time in the military up there? What, as you looked back on it, what did you think of it and about it? Because there was many who went in and they stayed for the 20 years plus. There were some who went in and never came back.
Right.
And there's a lot that goes with that.
There is. I enjoyed my time in the Marine Corps because one of the things I was able to experience was people from all over, not only the United States, but also a number of different countries who had joined the Marine Corps, and they were in my unit. I had people from Mexico, people from Panama. We had a man from Poland. We had a person from Venezuela and Korea. We had some Filipinos. And just to hear what their backgrounds were and their outlook on life was very helpful to me. But when the day was over, we all knew that we were fellow Marines. We all wore the same uniform. We were committed to each other. We were committed to carrying out the mission that was given to us. And so there was a real bonding there, I felt, among all of us, regardless of our ranks and regardless of where we came from. So for somebody like myself who was born and raised in Salina, Kansas, and then went to school at KU in Kansas, it was just a real good experience for me, especially when we deployed to the Western Pacific, and I met people from other countries and sometimes worked with their armed forces, like in Australia. It just was a real good experience for me to open my eyes, and that I think really helped prepare me for law school.
Okay. And then, of course, as you got older, you and your wife had kids. You have 5 kids?
Yes.
And did any of those go into the military?
My middle son enlisted in the Army around 2009, and he got deployed to Iraq, came back to the U.S., and he got deployed to Afghanistan, came back, and then he got orders to be deployed again to Afghanistan. And he said, I've been to that part of the world in combat situations twice. I don't want to go back again. And so he was allowed to let his enlistment term run out. And so he got out after 4 years.
And I'm sure his parents were glad that he got out because many a sleepless nights as you watch the news, I'm sure.
Well, that's an excellent point, because I remember I was in another state at a judicial conference, and he called me on my cell phone and left a message, and I called him back during a break, and he said, I'm enlisting in the Army. And every parent has to feel this way.
Yeah.
You say, oh my gosh, you're going to be in harm's way. I'm going to have many sleepless nights on the things that you're going to be doing and the places in the world you're going to be sent. And yet, yes, you're right. There were many times you just lie awake at night thinking, what's going to happen? Am I going to get that phone call, or is the officer going to come to my door and say, we have some bad news for you, sir? So when he was released from active duty, I just breathed a huge sigh of relief. You know.
I'm sure you did. We're going to cut away, take a break. You're watching Stories That Matter. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Stories That Matter with my guest, Lawton Nuss. And Lawton, before we cut away to break, we talked about the time that you were in the military and your middle son went to the military, and the anxiety that every parent feels in that way. And, you know, if he were older at the time, and why then, you know, his family would have felt that. I'm talking about his wife and his own family. But thank God his tour was not only a good one for him, it brought good memories, but he came back safely.
Exactly.
So let's talk a little bit about drug recovery, or drug court recovery is where some of the names kind of started with this. But your group started a group called...
Well, I'm on the board of directors for All Rise, which until about a year or so ago was called the National Association of Drug Court Professionals. They're based out of Northern Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C., and they have an annual conference. I attended my first one 2 months ago in Anaheim, California, and they had over 7,000 people attend that conference.
Are you on their board of directors?
I'm on the board as of that conference, yes. Right.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you for serving for that.
Well, happy to do it.
Yeah.
Happy to do it. It's interesting, if I can divert for a second.
Sure.
In 2012, I was attending my 30th reunion for my law school class when a man named Butch Tate, who was my classmate, came to me. He at that time was a major general in the Army Judge Advocate General Corps. He was number 2 in that corps. And he wanted to talk to me about starting a veterans treatment court in Kansas. To fast forward, Butch for several years now has been the chief counsel for All Rise. And I think he was helpful in getting me on the board a couple months ago. It's a 6-year term. But in any event, he was talking to me about veterans treatment courts and wanting to start them in Kansas, because I was Chief Justice of the Supreme Court at that time. And I said, Butch, I'd love to do that. As you know, I'm a Marine Corps veteran. My son is in the Army. And I said, but I'm closing Kansas courts right now because the legislature hasn't given us enough money to keep them open. Can't pay our employees, 1,600 people. And I said, so I'm going to have to put this idea on a back burner, even though it's very interesting to me. And I said, plus I'm working 70 hours a week as Chief Justice. I can't add that to my plate as well, even if we had the money. So he said, very well. And I was keeping my eye on things about Veterans Treatment Courts, or VTCs, and Johnson County, Kansas, in the Kansas City metro area, started the first one in the state of Kansas in January of 2016. And when they contacted me for help, I said, what I just mentioned to you, Doug, I don't have any money for you. I'm sorry. You're going to have to do this on your own. And they said, we're going to do it. So they've been in existence for 8.5 years now, and we now have 5 veterans treatment courts in Kansas. And Douglas County is yet another one. They've asked for federal funding to help them out. Saline County, Salina, is interested as well. And I've been working on Riley County near Fort Riley. They're very interested.
Yeah, absolutely.
There are some states, such as California, who have about 40 of them. Indiana and Ohio each have over 30. But there are some states who have none. And the Veterans Treatment Courts are a specialty court, like a drug court or a mental health court, that sort of thing. So there are some similarities, but there are also some differences.
So the idea of it is what, to avoid individual here who's been addicted and in the military perhaps, but not always, and became addicted to this, and they're not able to kick it. And rather than go to prison for some extended period of time, because I don't have to tell you, you already know this, to keep somebody in prison is probably about $110 a day, depending upon the severity of the crime that was committed. And the whole idea behind it is to help these good folks, men and women, to be able to kick that habit, to defeat it. Because, you know, when you and I were kids, I didn't know of any drugs of any sort that was addictive. You know, we may have a Jack Daniels or a beer or something like that, but never had anything that would just be so addictive to you that it would make you cast off your family, lose your jobs, and do things like that. But it's there now, isn't it?
It is. And the Veterans Treatment Courts, emphasis upon treatment, as you suggest, are there to treat the problem that's causing these people to commit crimes. And you hit on one of the big ones, which is a substance use disorder. It could be alcohol, it could be drugs, could be a combination. But it also treats people with other conditions such as post-traumatic stress disorder, traumatic brain injury, military sexual trauma, other mental health conditions. And with all of them, the idea is to rehabilitate them instead of just putting them in jail, having them get out much later, and then they go back to their same old habits. And so the judge puts them in jail again, and then they are in jail, they finally get out, they go back to their same old habits. So this is to rehabilitate them, and it helps not only that person, in this instance the veteran, to be rehabilitated, but it helps the veteran's family, and then it also in turn helps Kansas society, because as you were indicating, the cost of keeping people in prison or in jail, in the Kansas City metro area, it costs about $35,000 a year to keep somebody in jail there. In the federal prison system, it costs about $45,000 a year to keep somebody incarcerated for a year. By contrast, a veterans treatment court costs about $2,500 a year. Plus, you don't have that repeat cost of recidivism, that person getting out of jail, reoffending, getting back in jail, so there's another $45,000 a year. They finally get out of jail, they reoffend, they're back in jail, another $45,000. To use the Johnson County Veterans Treatment Court as an example for right now, they've had 70 people graduate in their 8 years, and 3 of those people have reoffended. So 95% of the people who go through their program, there's no more criminal problems. They're not incarcerated, their families are much better off, they're restored as contributing members of society. When you're in jail, you're not paying any income tax, you're not buying any goods and services, you're not paying any sales tax, not helping you and me as taxpayers. Right. But when they get out and they're rehabilitated, then they can get those jobs, and they can buy property, that sort of thing. So it's a win-win.
Okay. We're going to cut away, take a break, Lawton. We'll be right back. You're watching Stories That Matter. Welcome back to Stories That Matter. I'm your host, Doug Thompson. My special guest is Lawton Nuss. And Lawton, first off, thank you so much for all of the things that you have done. You've served in so many capacities, whether it was the Supreme Court and the military, and what you're doing with All Rise. Because, you know, as I thought about when you and I had talked about it before we got together to shoot this show, and I was thinking about it when you said about All Rise, the first thing I thought about was, of course, military, you know, All Rise, and and then the second one would be, you know, you think of a church activity, and All Rise, and because there's things that go with it. And when I thought about this, and you were telling me about the sheer number of individuals involved and what a difference they're trying to make, because it's something you just said earlier, the idea that, okay, if nobody helps these people, if nobody helps, there's going to be so many that their marriages are over, they will go into prison because they can't make a living at it. So now you're stealing and you're doing other things, and on and on and on, and it would just be a lot of good people who would have lost the opportunities. And the good Lord didn't mean that for anybody. He, as you will know, he takes his hand and holds it out and he says, take my hand. Take my hand. And I love the idea of the All Rise. Where do you see it going from where it is now?
Well, since I've only been on their board for several months, I'm not quite sure, but they do have a Veterans Treatment Court committee. They also have a standards committee. They have some other ones like that, and they are looking for uniformity among a number of courts for the reasons you give, and they're not forcing that on any state or any county, for example, but they're saying, here are suggestions on how to do this. We've been doing this for a number of years, and we would also welcome, you know, your input on this. But Martin Sheen, the actor, is very much involved in it. I'm going to mispronounce her name, Allison Janney, or Janey, who was on television for years on The West Wing. She's very much involved in this as well. In fact, when we were in this large auditorium in Anaheim, California, a couple months ago, 7,000 of us, all of a sudden the curtains, some guy comes out unannounced. It's Martin Sheen. And the other speaker's kind of standing there going, what in the world? And Martin Sheen gets up to the lectern and he gives about a 60-second little anecdote, and then he waves and marches out, and he's very, very thrilled about it. You know.
And security didn't come out and say, who is this guy? Get him out, huh?
Well, he's been there for several years, so they knew he was in the area. They just didn't expect him to pop out like that. But I wanted to follow up on your comment about the Lord reaching out his hand. One of the people I work with about veterans treatment courts is in Tampa, Florida. He's a retired Army colonel, over 30 years. And I got acquainted with him through my son, because he was helping my son, the former soldier, get a job. And I've had some ideas in mind as to why I do what I do. And he had something on his email underneath his name, and it was something I'm very familiar with, Luke 12:48. So I talked to him about that, and I said, Luke 12:48, for unto whomsoever much is given, of him shall be much required. And he said, Chief, that's why I do what I do. And I said, Colonel, that's why I do what I do. And I know there are people in this world who have the same blessings that I do, undeserved, and they also have skills, but they choose to earn a lot of money and buy a Learjet so they can fly off to their chalet in Switzerland, or their beach house in Malibu, or their retreat in Aspen. And that's fine if that's where they want to do it, but that's not the way I was raised, and it's not the way he was raised either. And my parents never came out and said, you know, here's Luke 12:48, this is how you should lead your life. But that's how they did it. They did that by example. And I said, yeah, I just can't see trying to make a bunch of money on the stock market so I can buy a Learjet and fly to, you know, my mountain retreat. We've got a lot of veterans here who are struggling. They didn't have the breaks that I did. They didn't have the blessings I did, and I just want to help them.
And I appreciate that. This is just amazing in multiple ways, because you can just feel the Lord's hand on the project. I felt it when I was invited to come into what was then called drug court, and then it went to recovery, and to see the people, and you get the frustration for a little while because you can't understand, that okay, here's the team here's the group that's in there to make a recovery from it, and what happens to them? Well, they fall right back. And then you get frustrated with, well, why do you do this? Well, not addicted to anything like that, so it makes it a little tougher. But once you get an understanding of it, then you really get a really good grip on it all. And we're going to cut away, take a break. Sure. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Stories That Matter. I'm your host, Doug Thompson. My special guest is Lawton Nuss. And Lawton, first, thank you for driving out from Topeka today to come out and to share the story and everything that's going on, and all of the things that we didn't go into all of the details of the things with your life, but it's been absolutely amazing for a kid who goes to Salina and becomes an attorney, and then away you go.
Right.
Do you feel like the Lord has plans for you, had plans for you, and still does?
Well, to kind of summarize what I said a minute ago, I just can't believe it's a quirk of fate that I was blessed with some talents.
Yeah.
There had to be some reason for it, and I think I'm finding the reasons in some of them, and I continue to keep working on such things as I have. One thing I did want to talk about was veterans treatment courts are like other specialty courts in that they're trying to treat the underlying problem for why somebody's committing crimes. What makes them different, several things. Number one, it's the military culture that you would not necessarily have in a drug court. These are all veterans, people who've been in the military. They understand what it was like to take orders, to everybody work together as a mission, respect for one another, and they've got a special camaraderie there with their fellow defendants who are all veterans. Sometimes the judge is a veteran as well, not always. Another difference is they have a veteran mentor. It's a volunteer from somebody who's a military veteran, and he or she comes in and they get assigned one of these defendants. And they meet for coffee, they talk on the phone, they go out for lunch, and sometimes that veteran mentor says, I've struggled with the same things you did, and here's what I did, or you have to stick with it, or you might want to change this approach. The third difference is the involvement of the Department of Veterans Affairs. If you've been in the military and had what they call a good paper discharge, you're entitled to VA benefits, which would be counseling or some drug testing or psychiatric treatment, whatever it may be, free of charge to the court, free of charge to the defendant. And that person, a VJO, a Veterans Justice Outreach Specialist, is part of the team in the VTC, just like the prosecutor is, just like the defense counsel is, just like the probation officer, just like the judge. And as I said, those are three differences between the VTCs and all the other specialty courts. Just makes them unique. And one thing I've found out also is once somebody graduates from a VTC, they're not just pushed out the door with the door shut behind them and say you're on your own. The mentor still helps. Some of the attorneys still help because they want to make sure that person stays on the right path and doesn't for some reason go back to where they had been.
I agree with you on everything that you said. I agree with you completely, and I always know this about it too, that in my own life and lots of other people, I can remember the times I would reach my hand out and say, Lord, I need you. I need your hand. And it was just like you could feel his hand, and he would take you out of the sewage that you got into and take you on to, he said, here's the bank. Here's the bank. You're out of the sewer. So now what do you want to do? And then you can say, I want to go with you. I want to follow you, Lord.
Yeah.
And that's awesome. Not that these people aren't. Many of these people you're talking about knew the Lord coming in, and many as they go through the recovery, they learn more about the Lord, and that's why I really like the name of it. All Rise. Lawton, thank you so much for coming out.
Doug, thank
God
you.
God bless you.
Well,
Take care.
thank you. This has been a great opportunity. I appreciate this.
Thank
very
you.
much so.
Hope you've enjoyed. See you next time. Stories that Matter.